Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at Renaissance literature, and one of the main themes that we see in one shape or another is the search for the ideal, right? And so whether it's Castiglione's or Machiavelli's or Thomas More's works, I want you to think about how we see the ideal embedded within them. And just to kind of review a little bit from what we've been taking a look at, we've been examining how humanism is influencing the art and ideas of the Renaissance, and it creates some major influences of bringing back ancient ideas and pagan themes being celebrated within art and literature. And I wanted to turn to a poem written by Lorenzo Medici. We talked about him before as one of the major patrons for the arts that's paying for a lot of the art that's coming out from Michelangelo and Raphael and the like. And he's heavily influenced by this idea of humanism, and he's also influenced by Neoplatonism, which we've also talked about. And I want to just read through a couple lines of his poem. His poem is a little bit longer than this. I just cut it down for brevity and time's sake. You can kind of look it up on your own if you're more interested in this. But I want you to see that, if you can find humanist principles embedded within this, and how this might be different from the ideas that we discussed that are common during the Middle Ages. And this is entitled A Carnival Song. Fair is youth and void of sorrow, but it hourly flies away. Youths and maids enjoy today, not you know about tomorrow. This is Bacchus and the bright Ariadne, lovers true. They in flying times despite, each with each find pleasure anew. These their nymphs and all their crew keep perpetual holiday. Youths and maids enjoy today, not ye know about tomorrow. Listen well to do what we're saying, of tomorrow have no care. Young and old play together plain, boys and girls be blithe as air. Every sorrow thought forswear. Keep perpetual holiday, youths and maids enjoy today, not ye know about tomorrow. Ladies and gay lovers young, long live Bacchus, live desire. Dance and play, let songs be sung, let sweet love your bosom fire. In the future, come what may, youths and maids enjoy today, not ye know about tomorrow. Fair is youth and void of sorrow, but it hourly flies away. And so in some ways, I mean, this isn't eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die kind of a poem, which, has its own problems of its own right. But essentially what he's suggesting is we really don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know if tomorrow is going to bring sorrow and hardships. We don't really know whether tomorrow is going to even come. And so he's suggesting that we really need to find enjoyment today. And I think there's value within trying to make the most of each day and what we do with it. And so what we see here, in addition to this, focusing on more secular values rather than strictly, focusing on religious, study in prayer and go to Mass and whatnot. He's suggesting that, this is a carnival, right? Go and have fun and enjoy life. That's right. Life is meant to be enjoyed. But we also see some ideas of nymphs and Ariadne and Bacchus, who's the god of wine and pleasure, all coming back, right? So this idea of this celebrating these old values and celebrating this idea of secular love and enjoyment of today. And so we see Lorenzo being influenced by these ideas and writing a poem on them to demonstrate his passion. But these ideas that they start in Italy, they then start to spread, and we're going to take a look at how they spread northward to France and the Netherlands. And here we're going to see just kind of briefly how they influence even England, right? Shakespeare is coming out of the Renaissance, and so he's heavily influenced by these ideas. I want to just take a look at two of his main plays to show you some of the ideas and values that stem from the Renaissance, right? And what I'm trying to show you here is, as you read enough of the Renaissance, get enough of the sense of the artists that are there, you start to see a common vision of how they see the world, how they see humanity, how they understand our relationship to God. And so what I want you to see is that there are similarities. Not that we can necessarily say that Shakespeare is the same as Michelangelo and doing exactly the same thing or have the same exact vision. But we do see some common traits that are important to note that indicate that there is a certain way of a certain perspective, a certain understanding that comes to the fore when we start to piece together eras. And I'm trying to show you that with showing you a variety of whether it's sculptures and painting or whether it's drama as we see here or poetry as we see with Lorenzo Medici. So we start to kind of get enough of them. I'm hoping that you guys can get a sense of really what the Renaissance is about and how valuable it was and how the long-lasting effect that it has, but also, some of the differences and how, they view life a little bit differently from the era that came before it and that will come after it. In Hamlet, for instance, some of you have read Hamlet in other classes, which is great. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. What happens in Hamlet is the young prince's father suddenly dies when he's away at school. His uncle, Claudius, marries the former king's wife, Gertrude, 1 month after the death. And so Hamlet's mother remarries his uncle, right, which already is a little bit messed up. But aided by a visitation of a ghostly apparition that looks like his father, Hamlet is suspicious of Claudius's behavior and seeks to know what really happened. He carefully observes the strange behavior of his uncle to know whether or not Claudius killed Hamlet's father to become king. And so one element that we see that Shakespeare is really interested in is this idea of what makes a good leader. And we're going to talk about this today when we take a look at Castiglione and Machiavelli, right? What makes a good leader? And there's a lot of Machiavellian principles as you go through Hamlet. You're going to see some Machiavellian ideas. Shakespeare was influenced by these ideas. And it's not as though he was, suggesting that Machiavelli was right. He was just influenced by, hey, let's kind of take this to the next level. Let's kind of give a thought exercise of these ideas. And so in some ways, Claudius is kind of a Machiavellian character. Or in another very famous Shakespeare play, Richard III is a good example of a Machiavellian character who we'll take a look at. And so he was similar to other ideas within the Renaissance, he is interested in the ideal. What makes an ideal society? What makes an ideal leader, right? Very Neoplatonic, right? And it's not just about regular, it's about the ideal. Let's take a look at Macbeth. We have a little bit similar ideas about leadership, but another idea that I wanted to really focus on. And this is more related to Mirandola's ideas. On the way home from his victory over Norway, Macbeth, who's the title character, stumbles upon 3 witches that prophesy to him that he will be Thane of Cawdor and eventually become King of Scotland. He soon learns that he has acquired a new title, Thane of Cawdor, and wonders if other prophecies will come true. Aided by his wife, he kills the King of Scotland and becomes the new king, kind of taking matters into his own hand. Macbeth returns to the witches and hears new prophecies about how he should only fear Macduff. No one born of a woman can defeat him, and he will only be defeated when Birnam Woods comes to Dunsinane Hill, which is about the distance between Rexburg and Idaho Falls. So it's kind of a distance, particularly back then when you didn't have a car. Macbeth feels invincible because, everyone's born of a woman, right? And there's no way that these trees can come all this distance. Feels invincible and tries to kill Macduff and all his family. Macduff, born of Caesarean, defeats Macbeth using wood from Birnam to disguise his attack at Dunsinane. Malcolm becomes the king. And so what we have with Macbeth is this idea of free will versus predestination, right? We have this idea of, if the witches didn't prophesy to Macbeth, would he have become king, right? Or we have this idea of if Macbeth didn't take matters into his own hands and kill the King of Scotland, would he become king? And so the question that we have within there, and Shakespeare's influenced by, Mirandola's ideas, he's influenced by a lot of these ideas that are circulating out there, is how much control do we have? What can we control and what can we not control? And so, again, these are just, a couple, brief ideas. I could teach an entire course on, the Renaissance, just kind of exploring these themes. I won't, but because we're kind of in a survey here, so I only have so much time. But I just want you to kind of get a sense as you start to experience other, ideas and go to art museums and read other literature from the era, that you can see kind of the influence that's permeating throughout much of the Renaissance. Today we're going to take a look at Castiglione's The Book of the Courtier, Machiavelli's The Prince, which we did both of those with the Zoom lecture on Monday. And then we're going to end off with Thomas More's Utopia. And I'm not going to necessarily go through every point of these, but I just want to give you some thoughts to consider as you're reading through them, and some things to consider. I want you just kind of for a minute here, kind of pause the video. And for the women, I want you to define an ideal man. What qualities would an ideal man possess? And then for the men, I want you to define what an ideal woman is. What qualities should a woman possess, right? That ideal woman. So pause the video. Just jot down a couple of notes. I'm interested to see what you come up with. What is an ideal man or what is an ideal woman? Because that's really what we're dealing with the Renaissance, is the ideal, right? So as we come back, right, as we start to kind of think about these, another thing to think about, we did this during the Zoom lecture, is how would you define an ideal leader, right? What is that? What are some characteristics of an ideal leader? Is an ideal leader, strong and determined, resolute? Is an ideal leader more quiet and contemplative? And that's what we really see during Hamlet, is that Claudius is kind of a man of action, and Hamlet's a man of contemplation. And so we see very different approaches to leadership within Hamlet. And I won't, plot spoil it for you. We can kind of see where both of those lead at the end of the play. I will kind of tell you that it is a tragedy, so be prepared for that. All right, let's take a look at Castiglione's ideas. How does Castiglione define an ideal courtier? What qualities should he have? And a courtier is just someone that's in the court, part of the royal kind of entourage, or someone that's part of the royal family. Not necessarily a leader per se, although probably along those lines, but just someone that is kind of that is in the leadership ranks, right? And so what would an ideal leader have? And here's what he says. And again, what I want you to think about is, what points do you agree with and what points do you not agree with? And it's not as though you have to agree with everything that you read in this class. I want you to have your own thoughts, right? But I want to present them in a way as though the author or the artist is there arguing. I'm going to argue in their behalf to some extent, just to give you their perspective. And then we can kind of pull back and say, okay, now what do we agree with or what do we not agree with? And he says, the principal and true profession of the courtier ought to be that of arms, which I would have him follow actively above all else. And the arms here is not, P90X and going to World's Gym or whatever. It's the arm of warfare, military, right? And I think that the argument that he's making here is because military campaigns are going to be a big part of protecting one's citizens. If you can't protect your citizens, you don't have a country or you don't have a kingdom. And so the first thing that a courtier should do is be military-minded, to know how the military works, to be able to be out there, to know about military strategy, right? And that's going to allow that person to protect his or her citizens, right? Moreover, I deem that it's very important to know to wrestle. There are many other exercises that greatly foster manly sturdiness. And so that ideal, right, that ideal leader has to be physically strong, resolute. And the reason why I put Michelangelo's David on here, it's not because I thought you would forget what it looked like, but because, he is this Renaissance ideal, right? The Renaissance man. He has that strength, that sturdiness, stands up to the giant, and has that, strategy. It's not necessarily about sturdiness, although it is, right, in part about sturdiness. It's also about strategy and craftiness, right? And so David has, in Michelangelo's version, has both of those, right? He's able to take down the bear and the lion, and he's also able to take down the giant through skill and technique. And so he has both of those. And so they need that manly strength in order to lead. But then he adds this to it, which is kind of interesting. He says, I should like our courtier to be more than average scholar, at least in those studies which we call the humanities. And we should have a knowledge of Greek as well as Latin, because of many different things that are so beautifully written in that language. He should be very well acquainted with poets, and no less the orators and historians, and also skilled at writing both verse and prose, especially in our own language. And so what he's suggesting here is you have to be well-rounded. You have to be able to, be strong, but also you have to have your mind exercised. You can't just be out there, the mindless brute on the battlefield that doesn't really think about anything else. You have to be skilled. You have to be, refined. That's what he's suggesting. And what he mainly argues about this as we kind of move forward, and we see that again with David, right? We see that he's not only strong and sturdy to take down the giant, but he also then starts dedicating his entire life to poetry and to music. And so we see that he possesses both of those skills. And just to think about this, right? What do these qualities, or why are these qualities essential? What purpose do they serve? And how do they benefit an ideal leader? So those are some questions I want you to get out of the reading. And just to kind of point out a couple of quotes to consider, he says this: and he will win a reputation for these good qualities by exercising them at all times and all places. And so one thing that, good military leadership and good intelligence does, it wins you a reputation. He says that cowardice is a stain that cannot be removed, right? And so it's kind of interesting that he suggests that you need that strength, you need that fortitude in order to move forward. And he says that learning the humanities, in addition to the satisfaction that will give him personally, it will enable him to provide constant entertainment for the ladies, who are usually fond of such things, and so make you popular is one thing. But also, I think more importantly is this last quote here: governing himself with that good judgment shall keep him from folly. And so having that intellect, having that insight, helps you not to make foolish decisions, whether it's in leadership or whether it's in war, that you're able to have that well-roundedness. And so if you ever wonder, first of all, why the humanities are important, giving that well-rounded idea of learning different ideas, different cultures, and trying to find value and truth within them is extremely important. But also it helps people to be well-refined and informed, right? That information is knowledge and power. And I think that's what Castiglione is asserting here. And we can see that influence of the humanists, right? This idea of the humanities are important because it gives us this kind of intellect and insight, and gives us, an enjoyment, that there's more to life than just, putting food on the table. Life should be enjoyed, not just endured, right? And so he's making that assumption. I wanted to turn to a writer, Francesco Guicciardini. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation or not, but here he says this is a portrait of Lorenzo Medici, right? And this is after Lorenzo dies. He writes essentially what is a eulogy, and I want you to think about, what does he celebrate in Lorenzo? And how does this kind of apply to Castiglione? And so this is an application of Castiglione's ideas, right? And so how do we see these ideas embedded within another writer who's, celebrating a real person, a person that we studied? He says, a state of perfect peace, the citizens of the state united and bound together. So again, the idea is, he's questioning, or he's pushing this idea of what makes someone perfect, what makes a perfect leader, and what makes a perfect state. The citizens united and bound together, and the government so powerful that no one dared to oppose it. The city was sustained both by its abundance in supplies and its flourishing and well-established business enterprises. Men of talent and ability were rewarded through the recognition and support given to all letters, all arts, all gifts. And finally, when the city was in a state of profound tranquility and quiet within, at the height of glory and reputation without, as a result of having a government and a head of its greatest authority. And so here he's suggesting that Lorenzo was able to bring peace and stability. That peace and stability allowed the arts to flourish, right? So again, that military and that strategy, right, enables a place to have peace. And then what do we do with it? We then are to, diversify, and we become more refined and informed and educated. He continues on. Florence had never, and I'm skipping through a lot of this. You can kind of, Google this if you want to read all of this kind of information that he gives about Lorenzo, kind of a glowing recommendation of him. I just want to pick out a few things just to kind of think about as his mindset, as an argument. Florence never had a citizen equal to him, and his fame was never widespread both after his death and while he lived. Proof also are the letters dictated by him, full of such art that one could not ask for more. He had good judgment of a wise man. And similarly, there flourished in Florence the studies of the humanities and the studies of philosophy and of art. He showed the same favor to vernacular poetry, to music, architecture, painting, sculpture, and all the fine and mechanical arts, so that the city was overflowing with all of these graces. And I think that this is a good example of Castiglione's ideas brought to light, right? And so Lorenzo is embodying this, or at least this is what Francesco is suggesting Lorenzo embodies, right? And then I want you to think about this other idea. And we don't really, talk too much about, Renaissance women because there's just not a lot of documentation out there. There's a few, but there's just not as much out there. So what I really like about Castiglione is he provides that perspective, that insight about how are we supposed to view women, right? And so something I really like about his ideas is this idea of how we're to define women. I want you to think about, as we go through this, what qualities should a lady, right, of the court, right? This is, supposed to be more of the upper class, but I think we can extend this to anyone. What qualities should a lady have, and why are these qualities important? And then I want you to make some assumptions here. This is what we do within the humanities. We take an idea and then we think, what does that mean, right? What's the significance of it? Do you think that these of the above qualities would have raised or lowered the status of women, right? So as we think about that, do you think that this is going to benefit them, or do you think that this is going to add to their detriment? He says, I wish this lady to have knowledge of letters, music, painting, and to know how to dance and to make merry, accompanying the other precepts that have been taught the courtier with discreet modesty and with giving of a good impression of herself. And so she should be graceful, she should be well-versed, she should have music and be able to paint. And thus, in her talk, her laughter, her play, her jesting, in short, in everything, she will be very graceful and will entertain appropriately with witticisms and pleasantries befitted her, every one who shall come before her. And although her countenance, magnanimity, temperance, strength of mind, prudence, and other virtues see to have little to do with entertainment, I would have her adorned with all of them, not so much for the sake of entertainment, albeit even there can be of service, as in the order she may be full of virtue, and to that end that these virtues may render her worthy of being honored, and that every act may be governed by them. And so as we think about this, right, what is he actually arguing for? He's arguing for a woman to be educated, and that it's imperative for her to be educated, and partly, to be able to talk and to be part of that entertainment. But it's not just about that, right? It's about being full of virtue, being full of grace and understanding and intellect. And so in some ways, I wonder if that does, add to the status of women who generally weren't educated during the Middle Ages. And it was only becoming quite new during the Renaissance. And so we have to wonder if that this argument is helping to change the view of womanhood. But again, there's this other kind of, there's a negative aspect to this as well, because he's suggesting that they should be educated only in a certain way and only to a certain degree. And so although there is some equality in this idea of being educated in letters and music and painting and dance and whatnot, it's not necessarily educated in, warfare or leadership, right? So there is imposed here a glass ceiling for women. Although there is some advancements, there are still some problems with it. And so I wonder, as we think about these ideas, I don't want to just think about the eras that we study within the bubble. And just think, well, that's good for the Renaissance. I want to think about what are the implications today, right? There's still this long-lasting legacy that we can learn from. We can learn from our past, and we should learn from our past. It's something that we should be doing as members of the church, learning how can we learn from the past and the lessons from it. And so I want us to think about, do women face similar ideals today about what they should be educated in, or what they should be allowed to be able to do, right? And so something maybe to consider as we apply maybe a critical lens to our own world, to think about how we can improve and how we can continue to grow and progress. Let's take a look at Machiavelli. He has I wanted to do Castiglione and juxtapose him with Machiavelli because both of them deal with the same idea, that is leadership, ideal leadership, but they do it in completely different ways, right? So it's interesting as we take a look at the Renaissance, it's important to think about some of the commonalities, but it's also really important to think about some of the differences, because the differences are important to see different mindsets, different approaches, right? Not everyone was thinking exactly the same way. They're not just like mindless drones going out there. But they are influenced by their events of the day, their culture, their perspectives, right, their understanding. And so there's just a couple of questions they think about. Machiavelli asserts that a prince or leader who inherits his kingdom or obtains it by fortune is less stable than a prince who has obtained it through skill. I want you to think about, why do you think that's the case, right? And do you think that this is true? And for this, right, to just add to this kind of complexity, again, to apply something that was written a long time ago to today. So these aren't just, dead writers that are there that don't really have any application. A lot of their ideas are still relevant, right? And here's an article about 70% of rich families lose their wealth by the second generation, right? And I wanted just to kind of read through this story about Stephen Lovell. When Stephen Lovell used to visit his grandparents as a kid, it was like entering the world of Cole Porter or The Great Gatsby. People dressed in tuxedos and sipped cocktails. They owned boats, airplanes, and a hobby farm. Not to mention a lavish mansion in Ontario, Canada, and a summer home in Southampton, New York. He estimates his grandfather, who founded the John Forsyth Shirt Company, had a fortune of at least $70 million in today's dollars. But through a combination of bad decisions, bad luck, and alcohol dependency, the next generation squandered that money. I think about it all the time, Lovell said, a financial planner in Walnut Creek, California. Indeed, 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation, and a stunning 90% by the third, according to the Williams Group Wealth Consultancy. U.S. Trust recently surveyed high net worth individuals with more than $3 million in investable assets to find out how they are preparing the next generation for handling significant wealth. Looking at the numbers, 78% feel the next generation is not financially responsible enough to handle their inheritance, says Chris Hillman, U.S. Trust Chief Fiduciary Executive. And 64% admit that they have disclosed little to nothing about their wealth to their children. The survey lists various reasons. People were taught not to talk about money. They worry their children will become lazy and entitled, and they fear the information will leak out. And so it's kind of interesting that some of these problems, that although there's wealth within one generation, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be passed on to the next generation. Although the next generation has a huge advantage because of that wealth, it's not necessarily to say that they're going to appreciate it, right? And so there's, interesting ideas that we can apply from Machiavelli. What does Machiavelli conclude regarding whether it is to be generous or meager? To him, which is better, and why? And what he mainly argues, and you can kind of take a look at this, is this better to be meager, right? The ideal, right, what we would think would be the right answer would be to be generous, right? We all want to be generous. But he argues that generosity runs its course, and maybe this applies somewhat to the previous slide about, losing wealth, right? If you're too generous and too free with your money, all of a sudden you run out, and when you run out, the people who are following you will no longer follow you. And so we suggest that it's better to be meager because you'll be able to maintain your wealth and your position and your power. People might not like that, and they might not like you, but at least according to Machiavelli, it's better to be kind of find a balance. But if you had to choose between them, he would argue that it's better to be meager. And so what we see within his mindset is a very different mindset than this idea of, the true and virtuous leader is someone that should be generous and should be loved and should be, well respected. He suggests that in reality, the application of leadership, the application of these ideas in the real world don't necessarily apply, right? You can't necessarily be a good leader and just overly generous because people are not going to respect you and people are going to take advantage of you, right? So something maybe to consider, right? He suggests that we live in an unethical world and a fallen world and imperfect world. And so we can't necessarily apply those ideals to the reality that we're living in, right? So the ideal that we need to deal with is the ideal of living in reality, right? And so we talked about this in our Zoom lecture, whether it's better to be loved or feared, and he suggests that it's better to be feared because you can control whether people fear you. You can't control whether people love you, right? So the one thing a prince can control is how much fear they're imposing on you. And so he suggests it's better to be both, obviously, but it's so hard to do that you have to choose one between one or another. You should choose between being feared, because if you're on the battlefield and people only love you, when they get afraid, they might run away. But if they fear you, they know that you're going to come back after them. They're going to stay there and they're going to fight. And so he suggests that it's much easier to control a kingdom through fear. And I want you to think about that, right? It's not necessarily, as we think about leadership, is that really what we really want, or as we think about parenthood, right? Is it better to be meager or generous with your children, or is it better to be loved or feared with your children? It's something to consider. How do we strike that balance? And just as a parent, I'll just let you know that no matter what you do, they're going to say you did the exact opposite. But he comes to this conclusion because he suggests that we live in this fallen, imperfect world, and the leader needs to realize that to be able to govern, right? Machiavelli asserts that a prince or leader should think of nothing but war. Why do you think he concludes this? And I think in some ways this is very similar to Castiglione, right? We need to think about preservation of the kingdom, preservation of power, because people are out there, your enemies are always out there trying to overtake you, right? And so I want you to think about whether we agree with that, right? Should our leaders, at least today, think about nothing but war? Or is there more to life? Should there be more to life, right, than this idea of warfare and constantly finding enemies, whether our enemies are in Afghanistan or North Korea or China, wherever they are, right? Should we constantly be worried and living in a paranoid world where we're worried about our enemies coming in on us, right? So again, just something to think about. The last point I want to take a look at with Machiavelli is this idea here. He argues that a leader must sometimes do something that is wrong or unethical or even immoral to maintain power and stability. Do you agree with Machiavelli that a leader should do things that are unethical or immoral if a person thinks that they may serve the greater good, right? So this is something to consider, right, as we think about what should a person do, right? Should a leader do things that are underhanded or sneaky if it's to preserve his or her own power? And there's a lot of, things that we can talk about in, 2020. I'll try to, not be political with our current politics, just because that tends to be polarizing, but just something to think about, right? As we think about our own world, right? And what do we expect out of our leaders? This one comes from 2013, so I'm trying to, provide a little bit of context to today, but not something that's so relevant that it's going to be heated and tune people out. This comes from what's called Bridgegate in 2013, when Chris Christie acted against a mayor of New Jersey who opposed him during the election, and when he was reelected, what he did is he shut down several lanes of traffic, causing a massive traffic jam. And what Chris Christie wanted to do by shutting down these lanes of traffic was to create a lot of anxiety and anger towards the mayor. so that the people would then become angry with the mayor and vote him out of office. And so is him using his power, doing something unethical in order to achieve a political objective of this is what happens when you defy me, right? But again, there's some other applications that we can think about, right? What should a citizen do things that are unethical? This is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Edward Snowden, but he used to work for the NSA, which is the National Security Agency, which mainly they are constantly listening. They're the ones that are listening on the other end of the phone. And generally what they do is they are spying on other countries to make sure that there are no foreign, threats that are going to, threaten our sovereignty. But what he discovered as working for the NSA is that the United States isn't just spying on its adversaries, it's spying on our friends, the people that we're cooperating with in England and France. But it's also, and one step beyond that, we're also spying on American citizens, which is a violation of constitutional rights. And so what he does is he leaks this information to the American people. He releases it, I think it was in 2013, somewhere around there, and makes people aware of this. And the government at the time clamped down on this, right? Obama was angry with him. He said that this was a violation of national security. And Snowden said, I didn't really reveal anything, secret. I wasn't, putting forth, any type of battle strategy. I wasn't putting soldiers in harm's way. I was just telling people that you're spying on them. And if that is what you think is a threat to national security, we might need to have a conversation about what the Constitution really means, right? And so he did something that was illegal for him to do. He wasn't supposed to, as a contractor for NSA, he wasn't supposed to reveal secret information. But then he felt that it was unethical for him not to do it, right? So it was illegal for him to do it, but he felt it was unethical not to do it. So then the question becomes, what is the morality, right? Do the ends justify the means in this case, right? Should the government spy on its citizens to protect against potential threats, right? Should the government be doing that? That's their kind of, their end is national security. Their means to do this is spying on all of our internet searches, spying on all of our phone calls and our text messaging in order to quote unquote protect us, right? Edward Snowden here is suggesting that his ends is to make sure that the American public are at least aware that this is what the government is doing. And his means to do this was to break the law in order to accomplish that objective, right? So the question is, Machiavelli argues, is do the ends, right, the outcome, justify how we got there, right? So that's something to think about, to consider. Another point to consider is the civil rights movement, right? We have African Americans that were protesting laws, Jim Crow laws in the South that were inherently racist. And so they took to the streets to protest this. And they were breaking some of the laws that were there. They were, drinking fountains that were supposed to be separate, right? There were lunch counters that were supposed to be separate. There were schools that were supposed to be separate. And they were seeking to create opposition to break these laws that they felt were unethical. And Martin Luther King argued that an unethical or unjust law needs to be broken because there is a greater moral good that's out there. And so in some ways that applies to Machiavelli's argument, right? If there's an immoral law out there, then the ends do justify the means, right? And so, again, as we start to think about this, right, as we start to think about an unethical world that we live in, a world of inequality as we see during the civil rights movement, what do we do with that, right? Are we supposed to follow the laws? Do we think about what is our responsibilities as members of the church, right? We're supposed to honor and sustain the law. Well, what if the law that we're supposed to be honoring and sustaining is inherently corrupt or inherently problematic or inherently racist, right? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sit idly by and just obey it? Or do the ends justify the means, right? So again, it's just some applications of Machiavelli's ideas. There are some problems with it. Once the problem that I have with Machiavelli's ideas is once you start, saying that you can do anything, right? You can pretty much justify any action that you do, right? And so I mean, it kind of does open up a Pandora's box that once you start saying, well, I'm going to justify my actions, well, you can justify a lot of actions, right? Hitler justified his actions by he believed that he was cleansing the world from a secret conspiracy movement that the Jews were creating to completely overthrow all the world powers. And so he believed that his ends justify the means. And so the problem with Machiavelli is, how far can we really take this, right? So I just want to throw a couple ideas out there to think about where your ideas are, right? Where do you fall in lines of this? Should citizens do some things that are illegal, unethical? Should our political leaders do some things that are maybe illegal or unethical? Where do we draw those lines, right? So Machiavelli starts that discussion, and we're still kind of continuing it to this day. And I had you think about in the Zoom lecture this week about businesses, because businesses take Machiavelli's ideas, right? Should businesses do things that are unethical or immoral or sometimes illegal to accomplish their objective of furthering their business, expanding their influence in the world? Or where do we start drawing those boundaries? All right, let's leave off with here. Let's take a look at Thomas More's ideal society. What would an ideal society look like, right? And so I want you to think about that. And for this, let's turn to 4th Nephi. This is a good way of thinking about an ideal society. And I just want you to think about, does this match your kind of representation of what your thoughts are? And it came to pass that in the 30 and 60th year, the people were all converted unto the Lord upon all the face of the land, both Nephites and Lamanites, and there were no contentions and disputations among them. And every man did deal justly with one another, right? So there's just kind of this fairness. And they had all things in common. Therefore, there were not rich and poor, bond and free, but they were all made free and partakers in the heavenly gift. And it came to pass that the 37th year passed away also, and there still continued to be peace in the land. And there were great and marvelous works wrought upon the disciples of Jesus, insomuch they did heal the sick, and raise the dead, and cause the lame to walk, and the blind to receive their sight, and the deaf to hear, and all manner of miracles did they work among the children of men. And in nothing did they work miracles, save it were in the name of Jesus. But then a few, verses later, and there were no envyings and strifes, no tumults, no whoredoms, no lies, no murders, nor any manner of lasciviousness. And surely there could not be a happier people among all the people who had been created by the hand of God. There were no robbers, no murderers, neither were there Lamanites, nor any manner of ites. But they were in one the children of Christ and the heirs of the kingdom, to the kingdom of God. So as we think about this, I want you to think about what are some of the qualities or the characteristics that this particular place had, right? What made them so happy, right? And with this, right, we have Thomas More. Now, it's not necessarily this is a one-for-one comparison, right? So we have the scriptures to get us to think about what that, ideal society looks like. And then we have Thomas More, and he writes a book entitled Utopia, which Utopia is supposed to be a perfect, ideal society where everyone is living in harmony. So think, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden kind of, ideal. And so he's suggesting if he were to create a society, not that this would be possible, but because you can't really have utopia, right, in a fallen world. But anyway, but he's suggesting how can we get closer to that, right? How can we reach towards this? And so that Neoplatonic ideal of utopia, right, a perfect society. And here's what he says. I want you to think whether you agree with this or whether you don't agree with it. Are there any similarities that we see to members of the kind of the early members of the church? He says that there should be an organization. There should be 40 people per farm. And so there should be farms, right? Mainly at this is an agrarian community. And then the 30 farms should have one ruler, a philarch, right? And so, and then 300 families have a greater ruler, a chief philarch, who's elected each year. And so thinking about this, right, I wonder if there's some idea of wards and then stakes that are, a part of this, right, kind of within our own leadership, how we kind of structure the church. And he says that new laws ratified after 3 days in council. And the reason why the philarch should be elected once each every year is so that a person doesn't gain too much power, right, and influence. And then these new laws, if you're going to develop a new law, it has to be ratified after 3 days in council. You have to it has to be important, right? So it's not like you can just come up with laws all willy-nilly. It has to be a serious debate. And here's what he says the daily life would look like. He says the occupation is going to be farming and craft, right? So So mainly the men are going to be out there farming and the women are going to be creating, craft. But everyone's supposed to be working. Everyone has the opportunity to work. And then the town life, right? And the craft could be cloth working, it could be masonry and carpentry. So, there's, opportunities there as well. In the town life, he says, the sons follow the craft of the father, but can choose a different craft if they want. So they have the opportunity to kind of follow in footsteps and, of their father, but it's not as though this is going to be, a dead end. You're born into that lot. He says you should not work too much, right? Like toiling beasts, that there has to be downtime. There has to be free time to be able to develop our skills, right? Very similar to what Castiglione is suggesting with the importance of the humanities, the importance of developing the arts, because it gives us, right? It's not just about this idea of survival. It's about living, right? We should only work 6 hours a day, right? 3 hours before noon, you should eat lunch, then rest for 2 hours, the siesta, right? Which personally, I'm all for. I think that there would be a lot less crime in the United States if everyone had a nap. Anyway, neither here nor there, but then work 3 more hours before supper, right? So this idea of this balance to the day. Rather than working, 10, 12, sometimes 18 hours a day, right? Different jobs that you would have. Lectures, there should also be lectures. These type of lectures should be, lectures on politics. They should be lectures on literature and music, right? But he suggested they should be open to all. That means that they have to be free. They have to be have that equal access. Because if they're not free, then there's only going to be some people that can go to them and some people that are not going to be able to go to them, right? So this idea of education should be accessible to everyone to provide that equality. And he suggests, I think the argument that he's making here is that equality, the more people are able to have the freedom of thought and develop their skills and become more refined, the better the community actually is, right? So when we start to limit people's education and growth, we actually are limiting our own communities, right? So something to think about. And he says that there should be music, right? And so I just want you to think about, how does work sound in his utopian society, right? It's just some place that you would want to go to live in, kind of like a hippie commune. Is that how you see it? Or do you see it as, I don't know, some place that you would prefer to go to, some place you prefer to stay away from? And how close to or far away from More's utopia are we in our world today? And just to kind of think about this, right? And this is comparing this to the United States. The average vacation days per year, think about our own downtime in our own country, right? The average days per year. In Italy, the average is over 40, right? In France, it's over 35. In Germany, it's about 35. So everyone gets about 3 months off, right? Brazil, it's just, it's above 30. United Kingdom, right, is above 25. Canada, over 25. Korea, it's at 25. Japan, it's at 25. And look at the average vacation days per year in the United States. It's about 12, right? It's about 2 weeks off for the average American, right? So generally what we think about, and this is kind of what I was told growing up, right? The more we work, the more productive we are. But as the more I kind of learn about other cultures and other countries, the more I start to learn that that's actually not true. The more you're working doesn't mean you're more productive. It could be there's a lot of deterioration, there's a lot of downtime, there's a lot of mental fatigue and physical fatigue. And so even though Americans are working more a year than workers in Germany who are getting about 3 months off, Germany is actually much more productive because they have that downtime, they have that rest time, they can come back and have a different mentality, kind of revitalized and ready for work. And so it's kind of interesting that a different kind of mindset, different cultures, we have different understandings of the world. Or taking a look at this one. This one is about the average annual hours per person in employment. And so as we take a look at this, we're not the highest on the list, right? So you see in 1990 and then 2000. But we are up there, right? Look at the Netherlands. This is the amount of average hours worked in employment in the Netherlands. And then Germany, we see it's down a little bit more with, the average hours per person. But then the United States, it gets up to 1,800, right? And it's only fallen off just, in 10 years. It's just kind of fallen off a little bit. But look at Japan. Japan was much higher in the 90s. And then they realized, right, that more hours doesn't equal more productivity. So they started to, decrease those amount of hours. And so as we think about some of these ideas, right? The application. We have this very puritanical view of work in the United States. We'll talk a little bit more about this with the Northern Renaissance, but this idea that that work keeps us pious, it keeps us out of trouble, it's virtuous, it should be, well praised, and that those are all, in some ways, in moderation, they're all well and good. But the question is, do we take them to the extreme, right? So again, it's just some ideas to think about as we think about ideals in the Renaissance and how they're dealing with these ideals within their literature, and then some thoughts to think about as we think about how they apply to us today.